watching Reason and Theology Live. The show concentrates on theological topics, historical matters, and philosophical problems with content ranging from introductory material to in-depth examinations. And now, your host, Michael Lofton.
Welcome back to the show, everybody. Your host, Michael, on a Tuesday evening, joined by returning guest Steve Ray. Been binging on his videos lately, watching all kinds of stuff. Some new videos, old videos, but mostly all on the Holy Land. In fact, I'm right now watching the Footprints of God, the one that it's on Jesus, and it goes
Jesus,
over
the Word became flesh.
Yeah, exactly. And so it goes over the different places related to his life, and that just so happens to be what we're talking about today, the Holy Land. So, but before we dive in, welcome back to the show, Steve. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you very much. We're getting back in the air this year. I think I'm busier this year than I've been ever before. 10 international pilgrimages, 4 domestic pilgrimages, and I'm already scheduled to speak at 20 different locations around the country this year. So
if you're busier than ever before, that's saying something, because I think you have done over 180 tours in the Holy Land. Is that correct?
I've been to the Holy Land over 180 times. We've done 80 pilgrimages to the Holy Land, but that doesn't count the pilgrimage we've led to Rome and Ireland and Poland and Guadalupe and St. Paul and Jordan and Syria, those places. But 180 times to the Holy Land, both to film and to just go there for our friends in Nazareth, our Palestinian Christian friends. I go there for weddings because we got good friends there now, and make movies and lead pilgrimages. So I kind of got a little familiar with the place.
Does that mean you're in Israel more than the United States?
We're in hotel rooms more than we're in our own bedroom. But
Okay.
Our group was there. We did Holy Land Part 2, which is where we start in Jordan, and we go 5 days through Jordan, then we cross over for 12 days through Israel. So it's only one I do every maybe 4 years, and we visit all new sites that we don't visit normally in the Holy Land. So therefore, like the alumni that want to go back and see more. And we were there the first week of March in 2019. We're probably the last group to leave Israel before they shut the airport because of COVID. And we haven't been back since, but we're going back in April and May. Can't wait.
Wow, yeah, I can imagine. By the way, I'm just kind of curious. Side note here: how many times have you been to the Temple Mount?
Oh, I've been up on the Temple Mount a lot of times. I've been like at the Western Wall.
Mm-hmm.
Every morning with our groups, I used to run around the walls of Jerusalem. I'd always run up to the upper room and pray at the upper room. And then as I'd go down around, I'd go through the Dung Gate and go up to the Western Wall and pray at the Western Wall. Then the rest of the way around the city walls and back to the hotel. Have breakfast and then take the group out on a tour. Up on Temple Mount, I don't know how many times. I know that we were just up there in March of 2019. We took the group up there, and I've been in the you can't go in the mosques anymore, or the shrine, the Dome of the Rock, because only Muslims are allowed in there now. But before that became mandate, my wife and I have been in there. All those places.
I didn't know that. So now non-Muslims are not allowed to go in the Dome of the Rock?
Right. They'll ask you if you're a Muslim, and you can lie, and they might let you in, but I don't feel right doing that.
Sure.
And if they ask me to say there's only Allah is the only God and Muhammad is his prophet, I'm not going to say that.
Right.
But when we did the movie on Abraham, that's where the rock is on Mount Moriah that Abraham offered his son Isaac, and it's underneath that shrine. And I hired a Muslim lady to take my camera in and get the footage inside for me, because I was able to go. We've been in there before, but now you can't go in there. So I had her go in and do the B-roll footing for me, video footage for me.
So tell me, what exactly is, we're talking here about the Holy Land, so it's going to raise the question, what is holy ground? And in fact, is Israel holy ground? Is it the actual authentic site of these?
Boy, when you step into a topic like that, no pun intended,
right?
You get into all kinds of views, religions, and politics about what is holy ground. I will say in a nutshell that I consider this the Holy Land, holy ground, because God walked there.
Mm.
He sanctified it with his footprints and his ownership of it as a special land. When I take groups to Italy, I say that we're on sacred territory, sacred ground. It's set apart for God, so on. But it's not, in my mind, the same as holy ground, because God didn't walk there, but he did walk in Israel.
Mm.
Now, the first time we see it mentioned, of course, is in Exodus, where Moses is, not in Israel, but just adjacent to it in Egypt at the Mount Sinai. And he's walking along, and he has walked that path many times with his sheep. He's been out there 40 years, after all, the shepherd. And he's now 40 years later, he's walking probably on the same bunch of dirt and rocks he's walked on all along, but he sees a fire and the bush is on fire, and he goes over to see. It's not unusual for a bush to be on fire, but this one wasn't being consumed, and God spoke to him through the bush and said, take off your sandals, because where you're standing is holy ground. Now, that was the same dirt he stood on a day before, and it wasn't holy ground, but because God came there, now something changed, and it's now holy ground because of God's presence. So that's the first time we really see something of holy ground in that way. It just means sacred. It's not common anymore. Another time I really like a biblical passage is in 2 Kings, when Naaman, the Syrian general of the Syrian army, has leprosy, and he comes and he's healed there. He asks Elisha, the prophet, can I take some of this dirt home with me? Can I have 2 donkeys, 2 mules? And he had 2 mules, and he filled them up bags of earth, and he took them back to Syria with him. And he said, from now on, whenever I worship, I will worship on the holy ground of God. I will only worship the God of Israel. And because back in those days, gods were associated with the land. Yahweh was the land of Israel. Chemosh, the god of Moab, and these different gods. And they were country had their own gods. Like Phoenicia was Baal. And so he said, because God is the God of Israel, I'm taking back land, dirt from Israel, and I'm going to stand on that dirt when I worship, so that I can be standing on holy ground. So that's interesting. That's but there's that concept of the land is made holy. For example, when I take our groups to the Jordan River, everybody is always getting things and wanting the priest to bless them, so they're blessed. I always tell people, get some water from the Jordan River, but don't waste the priest's time, because it's already holy water, because Jesus put his feet in that water. Therefore, it is perpetually holy water. The water didn't sanctify Jesus. Jesus sanctified the water.
Mm. And I'm just curious, have you brought any dirt back with you so that you could also pray and worship with it?
From that standpoint, yes, you wouldn't believe the museum I have in my home.
Yeah, I can imagine.
From rocks and water and plants and bark from trees, and even pine cones and bark from the cedars of Lebanon, from the northern Lebanon. So I've got quite a museum. One of my most treasured ones, though, is the sling stones. Mm-hmm. And I bought a sling stone from an antiquities dealer. They're about the size of a small tennis ball. Mm-hmm. And you can see where they're chipped, because what they did is they'd sit around at night and take stones and chip them, get them perfectly round, so that when they'd fling them, they would go straight. And we know that David was in the caves of Adullam, which nobody even knows where they are. I found it on GPS and with a geographic map. And we went in that cave when we were filming the movie on Jesus. It's outside of Bethlehem. And I went back in that cave, which would have held 400 men. And I found a sling stone in the back, one that had been trimmed like that. And I am convinced that's 3,000 years old, from the time of King David.
Wow. I'd love to see that one day. Yeah, I can imagine you have pretty impressive museum. So that's pretty cool. So let's continue with this theme of the Holy Land. So when we refer to the Holy Land geographically, what exactly are we talking about here?
Well, the state of Israel today, and we can get into what different people call it, but the state of Israel today, which is its name, and it has had different names throughout history, is only about 8,000 square feet. Mm-hmm. So you're really thinking, let's see, are you familiar with Lake Michigan, which is on the western side of Michigan?
Right.
It's not that big of a deal. It's a Great Lakes, we have Great Lakes, but
Sure.
Israel would fit inside Lake Michigan 2.5 times.
Wow.
Or let's put it this way, it would fit inside Nebraska 9.5 times.
Mm-hmm.
It's a small little piece of land. And why was it special? When we get people on the bus the first day, when we're driving up north from the airport in Tel Aviv, Ben Gurion, driving up to Galilee where we're going to stay for the next 3 nights, I always like to say, why was this land so fought over? Why did people fight over this land? It's only 8,000 square miles. It's the size of New Jersey. It's just a little piece of land. Why did everybody want to fight over it? More wars probably have been fought on that land than anywhere else in the world. And people say oil. No, they didn't have oil back then. Who's driving cars back then? Religion. No, it predated religion. It predated even Abraham and the religious wars of the Muslims and the Christians. Water. Well, water's always been an issue, but that wasn't the cause of fighting. The reason that everybody's fighting over that little piece of land is because it's a small strip, and where is it? Right on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. Everybody that wants to go to the great civilizations of Egypt, of the Hittites up in the European area, or over to Babylon and Persia and all that to the east, all those exotic empires over there, where the spice came from, all of them had to pass through the land of Israel, called the Via Maris, the way by the sea. It was the toll road. It was like a clover. If you imagine the 3 leaves of a clover, Israel's the center, the heart of that. Everybody had to pass through there. So everybody wants to own the toll road. That's where you make the taxes. That's why Solomon built up the cities of Giza and Megiddo and Gezer and the one in the north, Hatzor. And he built those up because they were taxing cities. So this is a small piece of land. It only has about 7 million Jews and 1.7 million Arabs who are Israeli citizens. For example, my guide is an Arab because Arab is his mother tongue. He speaks Arabic. That's really what makes you an Arab. He is Palestinian because his family's lived on the land forever, but he's also a Roman Catholic, and he is a Israeli citizen because he lives in Nazareth, which is any of the Arabs that live in Israel proper are Israeli citizens, carry Israeli passports. But so there are among them about 7 million Jews, almost 2 million Arabs now, and Christians less than 1.5%, maybe just 1%. So this kind of gives you the breakdown of the land. And the biblical sense is it goes from Dan, which is up in the north on the border of Lebanon today, which when we drive north up there to go to Caesarea Philippi, we drive right along the electric fence. I said, you jumped over there, there's landmines. And that's the land of Lebanon. Another place we come, that's the land of Syria. We look across and there's Syria. So, and then it goes south all the way through the Negev desert down to the Red Sea. And that's pretty much the land. It's 9 million people living on it, and it's only 8,000 square feet. And before the COVID stuff hit, they used to have up to 4.5 million people a year visiting, which is half the population of Israel.
Now, those people who are visiting the land, I imagine there's different perspectives. So Catholics are going to perceive the Holy Land one way, Protestants another, atheists another. What are the different perspectives that there are out there on the Holy Land?
Wow. Well, if you are Jewish, it is the homeland, and it is the land of Israel. It's the state of Israel, and there's a lot of Palestinians who object to that, and they feel that they are occupied. In fact, when I went to Syria and Lebanon, I had to get a separate passport. The State Department gave me 2 passports because when I go into Syria, they said, "Have you ever been to occupied Palestine?" If I said yes, then I wouldn't be allowed to come into Syria or Lebanon. And I said no, because I don't view it as occupied Palestine. I view it as Israel, the state of Israel. So there are those who do not accept that it's Israel. It's still to them Palestine, which we can get into a little bit because the name Palestine is actually very interesting. But let's cover this first. So when I first went with a group, I had a Jewish guide. He was my friend. He helped me with the movie, so I gave him the first opportunity. He was Jewish. So all along the trip, Everything was political. Jews good, Palestinians bad. That was just the mantra on the bus. Then the next time we had a Palestinian. He was a Muslim. This was the first times I went, it was kind of new to the whole thing. And everything was Israel bad, Palestinians good. And that was the mantra of that trip. So you can go on a pilgrimage, and depending on who your guide is, you're going to hear one story, and on the other side, you're going to hear exactly the other story. And you're going to come away skewed no matter who you're with. I understand both sides. I have friends on both sides. And I can easily put myself in the sandals of the Jewish people and explain their situation. And I can put myself in the sandals of the Palestinians and explain their situation. Now, it's really, you can't say Palestinian. There are two kinds of Palestinian. In a way, there's really no way you can say Palestinians. There are Christian Palestinians and there are Muslim Palestinians. The Muslim Palestinians far outnumber the Christian Palestinians. Mm-hmm. And they get along on a day-to-day basis out of necessity, but they are not friends. They're not, in a sense, the Muslim Palestinians majority believe in radical jihad, terrorism, this kind of thing, where the Christians never. The Christians are the best friends of Israel in that sense. The Christian Palestinians I know of and aware of are very favorable to the land of Israel, would never want to be under Palestinian rule. The Christians, Palestinians, and the Muslim Palestinians are two same blood in them, but different animals, so to speak. So those are the two big categories. Now you've got the Christians who are, at one point, the whole land was almost all Christian. I've heard claims that it was 100% Christian several centuries after Christ. And they now are less than 1.5%. They really don't have a voice. And they are the living stones. People go to see the ancient stones, the stones of archaeology. But oftentimes it really is frustrating to me that even Catholic and Christian groups go over, they have a Jewish guide, they have a Muslim driver, they stay at Jewish hotels, and they forget the fact that if they don't support the local stones, the living stones of the church, those living stones won't survive. Bethlehem was 20 years ago, 70% Christian, 70 to 80% Christian. Now it's 20% Christian. And they're leaving because it's very difficult. The Jews don't hire Christians normally, and the Muslims don't hire Christians. Who hires them? Pilgrims who come. And if we're not going to support them, then there's going to come a time where my great-grandchildren go, and the churches will be museums or mosques.
Excuse me, sorry. So let's come back to the Palestinian question, because I have quite a few questions there. Let me ask about people's experiences, especially Christians. Whenever they come to the Holy Land, I imagine they have quite a few experiences. Tell me a little bit about what some of those are. What is pretty typical? How does it affect people whenever they visit the Holy Land?
You mean as far as spiritually?
Spiritually, yeah.
Oh, well, yeah. There's I always tell people on the bus, you have come to see the land and to touch the land where Jesus walked. You want to walk in his footprints and touch the land. But be careful, because the land is going to reach out and touch you. There's something sacramental about it. And this is the difference between a Catholic and a Protestant pilgrimage. First of all, Protestants don't use the word pilgrimage. Martin Luther was very disparaging about that. And he downplayed it and condemned pilgrimages because he saw people as going there to earn their salvation and so on. They go there to do penance and they go there to seek after God. That's what the word pilgrim means, as a foreigner, a stranger. The pilgrims came to America. How did they get that name? Because they're going to a foreign land. They're pilgrims. They're sojourners in a new land. And so a pilgrim, we as Catholics, we view ourselves as pilgrims. Jesus, this was started by the Jews. We didn't start pilgrimages. Even in the Psalms, they have the pilgrimage Psalms. They are the songs of ascent, Psalm 120 through 134. And the Jews sang those Psalms on their way on pilgrimage to Jerusalem. So pilgrimage has always been there. But for Protestants, they view it more as a tour. They go on to the land with a Bible in one hand and a notebook in the other hand. And they're going to take notes. This is where Jesus was. I was in Capernaum. These verses all relate here. It's about this much. There's about 1,500 people live here. They take all these notes, so when they get back, they can teach their Bible study better. Catholics do that too, but there's a different sense, because for us, Christianity is incarnational. It's sacramental. And when I stepped on the land the first time, I never went as a Protestant. I know how I would have gone as a Protestant. But I went the first time as a Catholic, and I stepped off the plane. This was the old airport in Tel Aviv, the old Ben Gurion airport that had the tarmac, and you had to get off and go down the steps and walk all the way over to the airport building. And I remember I had a backpack on, and I got off that plane, and it was at night, and I was in the Holy Land. I couldn't believe it. Michael, I fell on my face on the tarmac, and I cried, and my poor wife, who's so understanding, just stood there, and finally she tapped me on the shoulder. Steve, we got to go. We're the last ones. Everybody else is in the building. I'm just weeping. Why? Because I never believed I would ever set foot on the land. And the land, I really believe the land reached out and grabbed me, because I had a new sacramental aspect of life. And everywhere we went on that trip, I cried. When I took my kids, my little daughter, Emily, she was 5 the first time, and everywhere, because she knew the rosary, we would say, this is the place of the visitation. She'd go, oh, and she'd run over and hug the rocks, say, this is where Mary was. So that's how we as Catholics experience it. Now, Jerome and many of the popes, and even Pope Francis in the last day or two, referred to the Holy Land as the fifth gospel. I was telling my groups that thought I came up with it. I was kind of disappointed that I wasn't the one that coined that phrase, but I must have heard it somewhere. But the fifth gospel, in other words, you have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, but we as Catholics believe it, or see it as the fifth gospel, because it opens up the whole rest of the Bible for us. We can understand the Old Testament, especially the Gospels in the life of Christ. So for us, when we go there, it's the fifth gospel. It's a doorway into expanding our understanding. The number one comment I get from people, besides I'll never be the same again, is the Bible has come alive for me. And I sit at Mass and I hear the readings, and I want to jab the person next to me in my elbow and say, I was there. And this is really what it does. And I even got emails today from people. I haven't been there for 2 years. I get emails today saying, thank you for taking us there. It just changed our whole life. I have a Bible study, and every week I'm sharing things that we learned while we were there. So for Catholics, that's the effect of it. I don't know how Protestants come back, other than they had a good Bible study in a way. They had a good tour and a good Bible study. And guides there know, by the way, guides know the vast difference between leading a Protestant group and leading a Catholic group.
What's their impression of the difference?
Their impression, I don't, from my guide, who only leads Catholic groups, he said he would never lead Protestant. He said they don't have the devoutness. They don't have the, we celebrate Mass at these wonderful sites. We pray, in my group anyway, we pray every mystery of the Rosary where it happened. So when we get to the visitation, we pray that mystery. Everybody says, wow, now I go home, I pray the mystery, and I'm immediately immersed in that site. And we take rosaries, by the way. Everybody has a dozen rosaries. They touch them on all these sites, and then they bring them home. And these rosaries touch the tomb. They touch where the blood dripped at Calvary. But the guides you have to use different words. Let's put it this way. There's a totally different nomenclature or jargon or different language, nuances of language between Protestant Catholics. And when you're a guide, you need to know words that resonate with Protestants, and you have to know words that resonate with Catholics. So you could say to a Protestant will say something like, well, we got to find out the answer to that. What does the word say? Meaning, what does the Bible say? Or a Catholic will say, well, what has the church taught on that? There's a big difference.
Yeah, I can definitely see that.
And they
Now,
visit different sites
mm,
too. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
no, go
They
ahead.
visit different sites. Protestants tend not to go to the Church of Annunciation because that's where the Rosary started, and this is Hail Mary, full of grace, and they tend not to go to the Holy Sepulchre. The really fundamentalist Protestants, they go to a place called the Garden Tomb, which is outside the city walls, down the Nablus Road a ways. Nablus Road a little ways, and that there's a place there that the Protestants have called the Garden Tomb, and that's where most of the Protestants go. They will not go to the Holy Sepulchre, and they don't go to the real place of the crucifixion and tomb. They have their own place, and there's others. They have their own other sites, and the ones that are really Catholic, they tend to avoid too.
One of the questions that I've been curious about, and I imagine a lot of people ask you this question: how do we know that the sites in the Holy Land are authentic?
I don't mean to be flippant, but my guide, whose family has lived there forever, they've lived on the land, and he said, "I know that because my father told me so." And he just leaves it at that and waits to see people's reaction on the bus. He said, one time my grandfather, when I first got a car, was able to drive. My grandfather said, "Amr, take me for a ride." He says, "Go here, go there, stop, park over here." And he got out and he walked across the field, and there was no carob tree in the field. He said, "I just thought I'd let you know that this is where I proposed to your grandmother. And it wouldn't be a bad idea if you tell your children someday, so they know your story, our story, that this is where your great-grandpa, this is where your great-great-grandpa proposed to his wife out at this carob tree." The people of that land have a different way of remembering things than we do in the West. I'll give you a good example, and then I'll answer your question more directly. Most Americans do not know where their great-grandparents are buried, unless, of course, you've done genealogical research. But if you go to the average American and say, "Where was your great-grandparents buried?" they have no clue, maybe not even know their names. Now, Jacob is riding his camels with his family on the Hebron Road between Jerusalem and Bethlehem on his way to Hebron. Along the way, they enter Bethlehem. His wife, Rachel, is very pregnant, gets off her camel, and gives birth to the baby on the road at the entrance into Bethlehem. His name is Benjamin, and Rachel dies in childbirth, and they bury her on the side of the road. Jacob then goes to Hebron. They'll go into Egypt for 400 years as slaves. Then there's 40 years wandering in the wilderness. You would think they would long forget where she was buried. Then there's 365 years where they're living in the land. Surely by now, 800 years later, nobody's going to remember where that old lady was buried, that great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother 800 years ago. But King Saul lost his donkeys, and he goes to Samuel the prophet and says, "Can you help me find my donkeys?" And Samuel says, "Go to the tomb of Rachel, and you will find your donkeys there." This is the Eastern mentality. Now, to get more, that's how they remember these things. Now, more specifically, let's go to Bethlehem and the place of the cross and tomb of Christ. Those places were very momentous. Something happened there, and the early Christians remembered where they were, and they went there to pray. And in around 110 or so, Emperor Hadrian, in an attempt to obliterate this cult of Christians, built big temples, pagan temples, over those sites. I think it was Apollo was built over Bethlehem, and don't remember anyway, over the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And for 200 years, those pagan shrines were there, but the local Christians never forgot where they were. They remember that because these were their places. Bethlehem, for example, who's going to forget that? The wise men came. The angels came down from heaven. All the babies under 2 years old were killed. Why? Because of something that happened right there in that cave, in that stable over there. And if you went there in the first 100 years, you'd say to the little kid on the street in Bethlehem, "Show me the place where Jesus was born." "Yes, mister, 10 shekels, I take you there." And they never forgot where that place was. Emperor Hadrian built these monuments over them, and they always remembered. Queen Helen came in around 324 or something like that. Christianity became legalized, and she came there to the Holy Land, and she asked the people, where is the tomb of Christ? And they said, under that pagan shrine. Where is the birthplace of Christ? Under that pagan shrine. She knocked them down, and she found underneath the caves where these things happened, with graffiti still there from the first centuries. And then she built huge basilica, big churches over top of them, so that no one would ever forget. And you read in Justin Martyr, he says that people still go there and see these places. And John Chrysostom, doctor of the church, in 385, he says, and people still go at this late date to see the place where Jesus was born. And after those big churches are built there, nobody forgot again. And millions and millions and millions of pilgrims have come there, worn the steps down. And we've never forgotten where those are. Now, of course, there are some like the Emmaus. There are 4 places claiming to be Emmaus. Nobody knows for sure. There are arguments for all of them. But as far as the key places, there's no question where they are.
There's 2 different places that claim to be the tomb of Christ, though. Is that not correct?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, here's very quickly. I go into this in some detail in my book on St. John's Gospel. Always it was the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was the place. Everybody knew that. Nobody questioned it. In 1850s, General Gordon from England came there. And I think he didn't like that place so much because it was very Catholic and very Eastern Orthodox, and being an Anglican and not a Catholic, he looked around and he said, well, wait a minute. The Holy Sepulchre is inside the walls. It says that Jesus was crucified and buried outside the city walls. So I'm going to look for another place where it really happened, because this is obviously inside the city walls. So he found a place, a quarry. And in the quarry, there's what looks like a skull, even today a little bit, but it's fallen in. And to think that that has lasted there for 2,000 years is quite miraculous. But it does look like a skull, 2 big holes kind of there. And he said, the place of the skull. And he dug around and he found a tomb. He said, this must be the place. And they called it the Garden Tomb. And today the Anglican Church owns it. And they bring Protestants there. And they do not say that it is, but they ask you questions leading to the conclusion that you will conclude that it is. I take my groups there sometimes just for the fun of it, just for the learning experience. Now, why is the Holy Sepulchre inside the walls? Because in 44 AD, the emperors of Rome built walls that went further out, which enclosed the Holy Sepulchre. So yes, they were. And if anybody had done their homework, they would realize that you can still go back in and visit. The last trip we took people in and showed them the underground, the archaeology, where the walls of that city were at the time of Christ, and the Holy Sepulchre is outside those walls. But then they were built wider around. I think that was Emperor Hadrian to 44 AD, whoever the emperor was in 44 AD, it slips my mind, built walls and it enclosed the Holy Sepulchre. So at the time of Christ, it was outside the city walls, but now it's inside the city walls because of subsequent building projects. And anybody that does their homework, and by the way, the tomb that General Gordon discovered, saying this must be the tomb of Christ, all archaeologists dated at 800 BC. It is a fact that it was dug and prepared, that tomb, in 800 BC. So it cannot be the tomb of Christ, because he was buried in a newly hewn tomb that was right next to the cross. So without going into more detail, that's a quick summary of that, why there is only one place. But Protestants don't like the Holy Sepulchre because it's very unfriendly to them, in the sense that they cannot do any of their services there. They cannot sing in there. They cannot have a prayer service in there. You have to be a Catholic priest to have a Catholic Mass, or a Greek Orthodox priest to have an Orthodox Mass. And there are 6 traditions in there. There's Greek Orthodox, Roman Catholic, Armenian Orthodox, Coptic, Assyrian, and one other slips my mind, but there's 6 traditions there. See, I'm getting a little rusty, Michael. It's been 2 years since I've been there. And and every inch of that Holy Sepulchre is owned by one of those traditions. The British Empire built up what's called the status quo, and they have to share things at certain times. So the Catholics only have access to the tomb from 5 until 8 in the morning. At 8 o'clock, the Greeks take back over the tomb. So if you want to have a mass in the tomb of Christ, you have to have it between 5 and 8 o'clock in the morning. So it's very unfriendly to the Protestants, not only in the fact that they can't utilize it for what they want to do, their services, but also it is so foreign to them, being so Catholic and tradition and so on, that they found their own place.
I imagine knowing these locations geographically in the way that you do has really helped open up your appreciation of the Bible and bring it to life.
Oh.
Can you maybe comment on that?
It's an inestimable benefit. I just wrote a commentary on the book of Genesis. It's going to be about 500 pages. Ignatius Press is publishing it this year.
Oh, wow.
Maybe we can come back on after that.
I
And we can talk about
would
Genesis.
love that. I love the book of Genesis. So please come on and let's talk about that.
I wrote it in a way that's for scholars, but also for popular. It's easy to read. It's a fun story. And in doing that, I have been to all those places. One of my goals in life is to visit every site mentioned in the Bible, and I think I'm about 95% there. So when I talk about the river Jabbok, the brook Jabbok, where Jacob wrestled with the angel, I've been there. I mean, I wrestled with a priest in that water just for the fun of it. When we were there with a group one time, I said, "You want to wrestle, Father? Come on, let's wrestle." So I've been to all the places mentioned in Genesis and in Exodus, and in the New Testament. So when you then study the Bible, you have a concept of proximity of place. For example, Mary goes to visit. She made haste and went to visit her relative Elizabeth. What, did she take a taxi across town? That's 90 miles. She's a 15-year-old girl. She has to travel 90 miles to visit Elizabeth. It's in Ein Kerem. It's a subdivision of Jerusalem. It's up in the hill country of Judea. It says it. Man, is it hilly. She was walking. She was no gentle woman. She was a tough Jewish woman to do what she did. And then 9 months pregnant to walk from Nazareth to Bethlehem, another 100 miare and then 250 miles through the Sinai Desert, which I've been in many times. 250 miles. These are tough people. No toilets along the way, no Holiday Inns and McDonald's to stop at. These people were tough people. And so when you know the land, it's and the people too, because say, for example, we just did the readings of Cana last Sunday. What about weddings? Well, when you are there, I've been to weddings in Nazareth. I've been to more than one. And Nazareth is only a 20-minute drive from Cana. I've been to weddings there, and they're still very much like they were in the biblical times. So to even be in a wedding there, it's a 7-day wedding, by the way, and they drink a lot of wine. To be there at a wedding and then to read that passage, everything is different. Men and women are not together during these times. Mary had to come out of the women's section over to the men's section, make eye contact with Jesus, say, come here. It just, when you know the land and the people, it makes the Bible just, that's why we call it the fifth gospel, widescreen Technicolor.
Yeah, I like that, because it does kind of open up the other gospels whenever you are familiar with the Holy Land, as you've noted. So, well, you know what? I also want to touch on something else before we get to some chat questions. But y'all can actually go ahead and start putting them in there if you want to. Make sure to put them to @Reason and Theology. So let's go back to that issue with the Palestinians. Could you please introduce us to the issues surrounding the debate between Jews and Palestinians on the Holy Land, and can you maybe kind of give an apologetic for both sides so that we can hear both sides?
Okay, just quickly, let's start with the word Palestinian. It was something that originated around the 1st century, the end of the 1st century. Some people say the beginning of the 2nd century. And the word derives from Philistine. Palestine comes from Philistine. Why? Well, the land was first called Canaan. The Canaanites lived there. Abraham came, and when his people were given it, his grandson Jacob wrestled with the angel and got the new name Israel, one who wrestles with God. So the children of Israel, they called it the land of Israel. So Canaan, and now it's Israel when they come into the promised land. Then it splits, and now you've got Israel in the north and Judah in the south. Jerusalem's in Judah. Then during the time of Christ, it's basically Galilee, Samaria, and Judea in the south. Then they fought against the Romans, and Rome defeated them. And to humiliate them, they called the land after its enemy, the Philistines. Remember Goliath? It would be like now if somebody conquered our country and they called it Iraq or China or something like that, one of our enemies. So they would call it that. They named it Palestine after the Philistines who had lived along the coast. And it carried that name, Palestine, all the way through the British Mandate, although it wasn't a separate country necessarily. And then in 1948, it was now back to Israel, the state of Israel. So that gives a little bit of that. Now, if there are, not, this isn't consistent across the board, but I've been confronted on all of these. If I call it the Holy Land, people say, why do you call it the Holy Land? That's not its name. Its name is Israel. So the Jews are offended oftentimes, even though they'll use it too. But I mean, the purists, okay, some that are touchy about the politics and so on, they don't like the term Holy Land because it is a Christian way of maybe not saying Israel. And they say the land is called Israel, so call it what it is. You don't want people coming to the United States and call it the New World. It's not the New World, it's United States, so call it what it is. Now, because many Palestinians, not Christians, but the Muslims, Palestinians, still do not recognize Israel as a state, they want to call it Palestine. And they refuse to refer to it as Israel. And if I say I'm going to visit Israel, they get all in a huff. That's occupied Palestine. They also don't like Holy Land so much. But then I have seen maps. When I'm in Syria, I've seen maps that show Syria and Jordan and everything, but Israel is just nothing. They view that there's no cities or anything on their maps. It's just occupied Palestine. So even the name is, we pick holy ground, Holy Land, because it's kind of a neutral. But I refer to it as Israel. I do not refer to it as Palestine because it is not a state. It is the territories. There is not a country. There is no legalized, formalized state of Israel, although the United Nations and others are trying to do so. But it is the Palestinian territories, which are the West Bank and Gaza down below, small area of Gaza down below. And they have different governing forces because they can't get along. When you put those two together, they kill each other more than if they fight with Israel. Hamas in the south in Gaza and Fatah in the West Bank. So you've got, it is the land of Israel. We call it Holy Land sometimes for the Christians because we view it as holy and we're going there for spiritual reasons, and we try to avoid the politics of it. We don't want our pilgrimages to be political trips. They're spiritual trips, although I have to tell people along the way a little here and there. Now, as to putting myself in their shoes, Israel, 20% of the Israelis today are religious. 80% are secular or atheist. That shocks people because they say, but they're Jews. Yes, but Jew means ethnic. Just because I'm an American, I can be a lot of religions. My religion and my ethnicity don't correspond necessarily. And in Israel, you can be Jew by blood ethnicity, but that doesn't mean that you're a believer in Yahweh, their God. So 80% are secular or non-religious. And so they would say, Zionists are one who would use the Bible and their history and tradition in order to claim ownership of the land, even though they don't believe in the Judaism necessarily. So here we go. These people go back to Genesis chapter 17, where God makes a covenant with Abraham, and he says, I will give you this land. All the land you've walked on from Dan to Beersheba will be your land. He even gives it bigger, though. He gives it all the way to the river, which is the Euphrates River, and to the Nile. So God was promising more than they've ever been able to actually possess. And he said, and God says, this will be an everlasting covenant that will be for all generations. And this is a unilateral covenant. It wasn't made as long as all your people obey me every day. No, I'm making a covenant with you, Abraham, and with all your generations after you. This will be your land. So for the Jew standing in his sandals at his podium, I have Genesis 17, plus I have the whole history, because they can go back and they're finding all of these artifacts from the priests and the temple and all the Jewish cities and all of these things. So not only do they have the promises of Yahweh in scripture, but they also have the possession of the land up until 70 AD, when it was taken away from them by the Romans. Now the Palestinians, they claim to have been on the land for hundreds and hundreds of years, and they have. But so there's many Jews have been there too. And they got along. The Jews and the Palestinians got along fine until 1948, when the United Nations and others granted, and President Truman granted that land to the Jews as a homeland. And Jordan was never a country before that. Jordan was going to be the land for the Palestinians, Israel the land for the Jews. And so up until then, the Palestinians, they lived there. They may have had a big farm, and their great-great-great-great-grandfather planted those olive trees, which are now 500 years old. You know, the olive trees in the Garden of Gethsemane, some of those are over 2,000 years old. There's 6 of them. And you can look at those. They've been there for over 2,000 years. They saw. You say if they had eyes and mouth, they tell you what they saw in the Garden of Gethsemane. But say that olive trees live a long time. So say my grandfather planted those olive trees for 800 years, and now you're taking this land away from me and giving it to the Jews? How is this right? This is my land. This is Palestine. What are you talking about? And the Palestinian says, we've lived here. How can you say this is Jewish land? So then you've got this conflict. So the decision was made that the Jews would own Israel and the Palestinians would have Jordan. Now the West Bank used to be part of Jordan. It's still, the Temple Mount is owned by the Jordan, the country of Jordan, the king of Jordan. So you have, that's kind of understanding it from both sides. I don't see how there's ever going to be peace in my lifetime. I don't see how it's going to happen, because much of what's going on in the Palestinian communities, the Arabs, is a hatred for Israel. And I have to say, and this is going to sound hostile to some people, they may not like it, but I'm going to tell the truth. And even Christians in the Middle East would agree with me, most of them that I know anyway, that the Palestinian Muslims hate Israel more than they love their own children. Because let's face it, Israel's not going anywhere. They're a powerful nation. They're not going anywhere, and they have the world's support. Palestinians, are they going to do better off resisting Israel and fighting them and refusing to accept their existence and shooting missiles across at them? Or are they going to do better for their families and their kids to work with Israel instead of against them, where they have opportunity? Look at this. Israel has the brains and they have the money. The Palestinians have the resources and the labor. You put those two together, you'd have the richest, most productive area of the world. But as long as they're fighting together, it's going to be a problem.
Now, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I think you were going to say something else.
No, I'm just going to say that the Palestinians, those who are continually fighting against Israel, like the Hamas and so on, if they would learn to live with Israel and cooperate with them, nobody's perfect, and Israel's certainly not perfect. But Israel, I believe, does want peace, and they would accept peace, even though they're bossy and pushy with the Palestinians. But there may be a reason for that too. But if they would work together instead of apart, they would have opportunities for their children, and they would have peace, and they would have prosperity.
Jared asks, for pilgrims in the Holy Land, what times of day are best when going to the Holy Sepulchre in Church of the Nativity?
If you want to go into the Holy Sepulchre, you have to go after 8 o'clock in the morning. If you want to have Mass in the Holy Sepulchre, you have to go there before 8 in the morning. Catholics have possession of the tomb from 5 to 8, or even a little earlier. I've been locked in the tomb, in the Holy Sepulchre, twice, all night long. And I had access to the tomb all night long because I was locked in there. But at 4 o'clock or so, it opens. And then the Catholics have access to the Holy Sepulchre. But at 8 o'clock, then it just becomes a tourist site. No more praying in there, no more masses. And you've got a Greek priest there going, move four people, hurry, out, fix four. And it's just pushing and shoving. And sometimes it's 2 or 3 hours of standing in line with a lot of people who don't understand what a line is from other parts of the world. So I would say that the best time to go to the Holy Sepulchre is early in the morning. We get our groups up at 3:30 in the morning on one day. We walk the Via Dolorosa all by ourselves with nobody in the streets. We carry our crosses. We give everybody an olive wood cross to carry that they can take home. We go into the Holy Sepulchre. Nobody's there still. It's only 4:30, 5 o'clock. We go and touch the top of Calvary, which later in the day is just mobbed with people like sardines packed up there. And you can pray and you can touch it. And then you can go down and you can see the tomb and maybe go. And we have mass for our groups at the tomb early in the morning. Then by 8 o'clock, we're already back at the hotel eating breakfast when everybody else starts coming in, but we've already done all of this with nobody there. The Church of Bethlehem is a problem no matter how you do it, because they have these liturgies in the morning with the Orthodox, and then the Armenians have their liturgy there. And when they finally open up the birthplace of Christ, there's already a line, sometimes going all the way out into Manger Square. So we've been there at times where we really lucked out. During the Intifada, when my wife and I first started going there, we went into the Church of Nativity. No one was there all day. Maybe a few locals had come. Americans were scared to death to come because there was fighting. After 9/11, we had the whole place to ourselves because everybody was afraid to fly. But in the last couple of years that we went there, sometimes the lines were 3 and 4 hours long, 90 degrees, no place to sit, no toilets. And so Bethlehem can be a problem anytime. We have learned to negotiate the crowds getting there, but it's not easy. You have to it's almost a daily juggle. The best time of year to go, people ask me that. It depends on what you like. I like cool. I don't like really hot. We never take groups in end of June, July, or August because Galilee can be over 100 degrees and the Dead Sea area can be 100. And I've been there when it's 128 and my cell phone wouldn't even work. My iPhone died. It says too hot, too hot. I like going there during January, February. And then the spring it gets more crowded, and then the summer it's just too hot. So we've historically over the last 10 years taken 10 groups a year, all through the year, except we just avoid July and August mostly.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So there's another question here. What is the Catholic perspective on the Holy Fire?
I have a whole lot of material and literature on it that claims that it is real. I don't doubt that it could be real. It happens only for the Greek Orthodox, supposedly. I have friends who are there. I have friends who work in the Holy Sepulchre. A former superior of the Holy Sepulchre, a Franciscan, is a friend of mine, and they said it's not the case. Now, I haven't
They say
seen
it's not real.
It's not real. That there's things done to make it happen. Now, these are if you ask me for the Catholic perspective,
mm-hmm.
And it happens during the Greek Orthodox Easter celebration, mm-hmm. when Catholics aren't necessarily there, so they don't. I've had people say that they swear it's authentic. I have a whole book this thick on the Holy Fire. I haven't read it all, but claiming it's authentic. But the people that I know that live there, mm-hmm. and even lived in the Holy Sepulchre, the Franciscans, they will just kind of snicker and they don't want to say too much, but they don't accept the authenticity of it.
Hmm. Oh, wow. Okay. So now I know that some are allowed to be in there's a few that are in the tomb, I think with the Patriarch of Jerusalem whenever it happens. Do you know anybody was ever in the tomb with him?
No, I don't.
Okay.
Because it's Greek Orthodox, and the Greek Orthodox and the Catholics, they really don't get along. Mm-hmm. You can find videos on YouTube of mm-hmm. those different priests fighting, pulling hair, punching. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. They really, it's a microcosm of real world Christianity. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The traditions, there's hostility between them, and if you cross the line, for example, outside in the courtyard, there are the steps going up. It was the Crusader entrance to Calvary, and they're up steps going up, and the Catholics own those steps, but the Greek Orthodox own the courtyard. Now the bottom step is about this tall. Okay, so it's a step, and then the Greek Orthodox say that step, that's part of the courtyard. Catholics say no, that's a step. We own that, and it's caused fist fights and rock fights over who's going to wash that 1 foot by 3 foot section of stone. So when you say has any of our Catholic people know? No, we haven't. The priests, the Franciscans, and so on, I know, are not allowed in that area during the Greek Orthodox liturgies in general.
Mm-hmm. Well, that kind of answers the next question. How is the Orthodox and Catholic relations in the Holy Land from your experience?
Well, what happens in the Holy Sepulchre and the churches is different than what happens in the real world outside. My guide, his mother was Greek Orthodox and his father was Roman Catholic. And in the land of the Bible there, those two, the majority of Christians in Israel, say, the holy sites, are Greek Orthodox. The minority are Roman Catholic. And they don't have the same limitations on marriage because there's so few of them. Greek Orthodox and Catholics tend to marry together without any problem. And they get along well in neighborhoods and so on because they are the minority. I mean, if you and I were the only Christians and we lived in a environment very hostile to us, you and I'd get along, even if you were Greek Orthodox and I was Roman Catholic, or you're Protestant, we would be brothers. My friend says, anybody over there that does this in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, we love them and accept them, and they're one of us. That's the people in the street. Now, the priests in the churches, that's a different matter.
Mm-hmm. One more question here. Do Catholic Orthodox and Oriental Orthodox have equal rights to every holy site or church in the Holy Land? Are there any sites that are only Roman Catholic?
Yeah, there's all kinds of different arrangements. For example, the church at Gethsemane is Roman Catholic. On the top of Mount Zion, you have the Abbey of the Dormition, where Mary fell asleep. That's Roman Catholic. There's many, and then there's Greek Orthodox. They have their churches. In fact, in Bethlehem, I think there's 9 or 10 churches called the Church of Nativity, and there's 23 churches in Nazareth called the Church of Annunciation. There's the Greek Orthodox. There's the Greek Catholic. There's the Greek Roman Catholic. There's the Armenian Catholic. So there's all kinds of churches with all the different traditions. The ones that are complicated are ones like the Holy Sepulchre, which have 6 traditions. And that real estate is probably the most fought over, and well, maybe the Temple Mount is, but among Christians, that area inside the Holy Sepulchre is carefully marked out who owns what territory. The real estate there is carefully boundaried, and everybody is on a schedule as to when they can have access. The Armenians have access to the tomb for certain hours. The Greeks have access to the tomb all the time because they own it. Even there, see, for example, the Greek Orthodox own the tomb, and they own the top of Calvary. The Roman Catholics only own the section up there where Jesus was stripped of his garments. And in the Holy Sepulchre, the Catholics only own the section off to the east, or so I think it is, where it's in the where the pillar is where Jesus was whipped and so on, at Mary Magdalene's altar. But the Greek Orthodox own the tomb. But because of the British mandate that was mandated, everybody has a schedule where they have access to the main sites, like the tomb and Calvary. But there are areas that are just for the Greek Orthodox and just for the Armenians or the Catholics, and those are not welcome to come. This is the case in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and there are 3 traditions in Bethlehem. The Greek Orthodox own most of everything there. The Armenians own an altar, and the Catholics only own a little place where the baby was laid in the manger. They don't own the place where he was born, but only another place to the side. The Catholics own that, and they can have mass down there once in a while on a regular schedule. So the Bethlehem is Catholic, Orthodox, and Armenian. Greek Orthodox, not just Orthodox, Greek Orthodox. So it's a very complicated situation there in those churches.
Steve, thank you so much for coming on and doing this. I could sit here and pick your brain for hours. I'd love to have you back on to talk more about the Holy Land and also to talk about your book on Genesis, maybe even your book on John. I have not read
Oh,
that
I'd love
yet,
to
but
talk
that
about
sounds fascinating.
the book on John is 450 pages, and what I try to do is bring out all the Jewish background, because you can't understand John's gospel unless you understand Judaism and the meaning of the words and the culture. So I would love to talk about that sometime.
And that's published by Ignatius?
Yes.
And when did you say Genesis is coming out?
They said it's going to the copy editors this month. So
Excellent.
Hopefully right now it's going to the editors. They'll be bouncing it back and forth with me, and hopefully by the end of the year.
Perfect. Well, I'll look forward to that. We're going to have you on as long as your schedule permits. We're going to have you on, Lord willing.
Well, thank you.
Again. So
a lot of things I love to talk about, and you are a bright guy and a good interviewer. So I'm happy to come on your show anytime.
I appreciate it. And everybody, thank y'all for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. And by the way, Steve, put in a plug for anything else that you want everybody to be aware of.
Well, my website is Catholic Convert. Easy to remember, CatholicConvert.com. Everything we do there, I put up a daily blog about all these kind of things and politics too. And I kind of interested in all the same things you are, and William Albrecht and so on. So I put up a daily blog. I've got hundreds of documents and articles I've written about everything under the sun, hundreds of conversion stories. All of our pilgrimages are there. If you don't have the time or money or the health to go on a pilgrimage anywhere, I have made videos of every pilgrimage we've gone on, 2-hour high definition video. So you can go anywhere to these Catholic sites virtually through our videos too on my website.
Is that through the Footprints of God series, or is it a different?
That is, I have two websites, but if you go to CatholicConvert.com, there's a big banner on the top that says pilgrimages. Click.
If you're looking to
So sorry about that. I did not mean to hit that yet. Yeah, you were saying if you go to CatholicConvert.com, it does what? Where do you go?
Right at the top is a pilgrimage banner. So if you click that, it takes you to my pilgrimage site. Interactive maps, everything there. But Catholic Convert is the hub for everything else on my site.
CatholicConvert.com. Excellent. I'm going to put that in the description as well. Again, thank you so much for coming on and doing this, Steve. I really value your time and your expertise here.
Thank you, Michael. I'm doing a show with William Albrecht on Friday about Abraham.
That's going to be fun. And is that going to be 6 p.m. Central or?
I'm recording it with him at 3 p.m. Eastern time.
Gotcha. Okay. And he'll live stream it then as well?
Yep.
So y'all go and check that out, and that will be on William's channel there. Yeah. Excellent. Okay. So definitely go and check that out, 3 p.m. Central. And like I said, we'll have you back on soon, Steve. We'll talk off the air about some dates.
Sound good. Thanks.
All right. And everybody, thank y'all again for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and also check us out, patreon.com/Reason and Theology if you want to support us. We'll see y'all later. God bless.
If you're looking to buy or sell a home, office, or any kind of property anywhere in the world, you're going to want to call Real Estate for Life, and they're going to connect you with a Catholic agent. Now, that agent will donate a portion of their commission upon sale, and Real Estate for Life will donate 75% of that gift to a pro-life organization at no cost to you. Call Real Estate for Life at 1-877-LIFE-US1 or text them 248-431-1440. If you care about the pro-life cause, call them now.